Okay.
Do you have the housing code in digital form that you could lead us through?
There. Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so we're good?
Yes.
You're good to go.
Great.
I can cover.
You're gonna have to, David. So good afternoon, everyone. I officially call the meeting to order at 2:02 p.m. And the first thing I'll ask for is for any members of the board, housing PRC or staff, if there is a conflict of interest.
No.
None.
None.
Great, hearing none.
Kevin Wilson.
Oh, sorry, Kevin, thank you. Can I get a motion to accept the agenda from our last month's meeting?
So moved, Gandara.
Counselor Flores?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Oh, and then acceptance of the agenda. My apologies. I skipped one. Can I get a motion?
Actually, I think you worded that as moved for the acceptance of the agenda.
Oh, I did say that?
Yes, ma'am, you did.
Yeah, I think you meant minutes, but it's okay.
So
Well, no,
now
then I
you
did it right.
You can go on to the minutes now.
Great. Can I get a motion to accept the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Before we move on to action items, can we get a round of intros? So folks, just introduce yourself and then pick the next person to go after you.
You start, Counselor Bencomo.
And my name is Joanna Bencomo, City Councilor for District 4. And next on my list is Sonia.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Sonia from MFA. And next I'll choose Cassandra Gandara, sorry.
Hi, good
Madam
afternoon.
Chair.
Mayor Pro Tem Cassandra Gandara.
Madam Chair, a question.
Yes, Councilor Flores.
Thank you. Can people please state their last names also?
Yes,
Because-
thank you.
It'd be very helpful to know because we have a lot of Sonias. At least I have Sonias in my life, so.
Great. Excuse me, Sonia Unrau, thank you.
Thank you, Sonia and Councilor Flores.
Thank you.
Do you want to go next?
Oh, me?
Yes.
Yvonne Flores, City Councilor, District 6.
Do you want to pick someone to go after you?
I don't know who's after me. Let me look at the.
I'll go next. David Dahlon, Assistant City Manager, Chief Operating Officer, and next is Natalie. You're muted, Natalie.
Natalie Green. I'm the Housing and Neighborhood Services Manager for Community Development with the City of Las Cruces.
And you pick who?
Natalie.
And I'm going to pick Kevin.
And I'm Kevin Wilson, Housing Development Coordinator for the City of Las Cruces.
You pick.
Jan, have at it.
I am Jan Lauterbach, Housing Development Coordinator with the City of Las Cruces.
Juan.
Juan Olvera, Executive Director, Housing Authority.
Nicole.
Hi, Nicole Martinez, Director, Mesilla Valley Community of Hope.
Thank you. Becky, did you go already?
No, Becky Baum, you're a transcriptionist. Thank you.
Thank you. Did I miss anyone? Did we miss anyone? Feel free to jump in. Introduce yourself. Great, I didn't miss anyone. And then Dominic's handling just IT for us, right?
Yes, Dominic Aragon is our communications specialist, media specialist, and he's handling the technical issues by broadcasting the meeting and
Great.
dealing with Zoom issues.
Thank
And
you, Dominic.
he's generally a very shy, quiet guy and doesn't want to be on the record. So,
Well,
my
thank you,
words.
Dominic. All right, and then we can go ahead and move to action items. And I think first on the agenda, wait, no, I'm sorry, we don't have any action items. And then general discussion. It's been a long week, everyone, and it's only Wednesday. General discussion, we're going to finish the conversation we started last week. It was pretty heavy, and we didn't get through all of it. So I think David is going to lead us through the end part of the Uniform Housing Code. I think we finished the nuisance abatement, right? And we needed to move on to Uniform Housing Ordinance.
Madam Chair, David Dolan for the record. Yes, we completed the discussion on the nuisance abatement ordinance.
Yes.
And then the next portion that we carried over to this meeting from the August meeting is the Uniform Housing Code or Ordinance. And I think we have Ben Beard just joined us at 2:07, Madam Chair.
Hi, Ben. Welcome. Do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. Thank you. I'm Ben Beard with, excuse me, Red Cliff Homes, representing the Las Cruces Home Builders Association on the committee.
Thank you. All right, David, take it away.
Natalie, do you have a screen that you can share on the housing ordinance? So I'm gonna. So this is a draft work product from the city attorney's office related to establishing a uniform housing code. Currently, the city does not have one. It would become part of Chapter 30, which is of the municipal code, which is in the development code portion, volume 2. And Chapter 30, for those of you who don't know, is the building code per se. So this would be a new, well, not per se, it is the building code. That is where we adopt the Uniform Building Code, the Uniform Mechanical Code, the National Electrical Code, the Uniform Fire Code. And that's where we contain our exceptions. This would be a new article or new division within it specific to housing. It is to, and we'll just go through it section by section. So I'll ask Natalie to scroll through. So the first section is the short title, which essentially names the whole article as the Uniform Housing Code. The next section is the purpose, which is to provide the minimum standards for safeguarding life or limb, health, property, and public welfare by regulating and controlling the occupancy level and maintenance of all residential, non-residential buildings and structures within the city. And then the next section, Natalie, if you'll scroll down, is the scope. And it talks about where it would be applied.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry, I don't see it on the screen. Are you sharing or?
I can see it, Mayor Pro Tem.
Natalie, do you want to stop sharing and then reshare?
Yeah, I can see it too.
Our other,
and I can also hear a lot of people talking in the background. So somebody hasn't unmuted and there's talking.
No, actually, Councilor Flores, I think it might be maybe David might have some background noise. He's the only one unmuted.
And I do. And let me step away real quick.
No, don't worry about it.
Well,
are you having a party and you didn't invite us, David?
Madam Chair, it's my better half and he's on the phone.
Oh, I'm sorry.
This is what it means to be
my
virtual.
apologies to Kristen. No, my apologies to you and to Kristen.
Mayor Pro Tem, can you see it now? Great.
Okay, thank you for pointing that out. So section 5 is the scope section, and it really talks about the application and then the alteration and relocation. It essentially says that this code, once adopted, will apply to all buildings or any portions thereof used or designed or intended for human habitation. Such occupancies in existing buildings may be continued in accordance with sections 30-136 and 30-721. That essentially hits on our existing building code portion that says if a building was constructed at a time under a different code, say built in the 1980s under a 1980 something building code, then that can continue except when structures are deemed to be substandard as defined elsewhere within the code. Alterations and relocation applies if a building going forward after the code is adopted is enlarged, altered, or repaired to make into conformance with this code. Then the new work is subject to the code and must be in accordance with both this section and the building code sections. And then the same would hold true if we happen to have buildings that are moved into this jurisdiction and put into place. That does not happen often. And that was Snicker saying hello real quick. And hold on just a second.
I've never heard such a vocal cat before.
The cat like that too.
My colleagues at
Cute.
home
Yes.
are hard to work with. His food station is right across from my workstation, and he's old and senile and doesn't realize that his food bowl is full. So I had to point it out to him. All right, next is, I hope that's the worst thing that happens to me when I'm old and senile. So the next section is pretty standard. It's related to definitions. It covers everything from apartment house, approved, the building code, which is the uniform building code, which department would administer the code that's proposed at this time to be community development, who's the director, dwelling unit, and so forth. These are all pretty standard definitions. The health officer, the city does not have a health office. We defer to the actual health department or the environment department in the similar case. So those are pretty standard. There's hotel and motel are included in the definitions because sometimes we end up with long-term occupancy in those situations. Then nuisance, that will be a cross-reference to, Natalie, if you'll stop right there at nuisance. One of the key things is it also includes an attractive nuisance definition, which proves detrimental to children, whether in the building or on the premises. And as legal explained it to me, just because of the nature of its existence, it creates a factor of curiosity with children and thus exposes them to a hazard because of that curiosity. For example, an abandoned refrigerator on a site or unattended or unsecure refrigerator could cause children who are walking on the street to trespass on the property and get themselves trapped in such an unsecured appliance, thus making it dangerous to children. So there's a varied list, and I believe that list also conveys to the other nuisance ordinance as well. Then the other three items is whatever is dangerous to human, overcrowding of rooms, insufficient ventilation or illumination, that means air flow and lighting, inadequate or unsanitary sewer or plumbing facilities, any violation of the housing codes set forth in this code. Then chapter 18 is the nuisance ordinance, and then chapter 11 is the fire ordinance, I believe. And then it continues on with definitions. So we can, and we need to define relocation code and then uniform administrative code. So those are the definitions. So we're now on to division 2. And I'm in speaker mode, so I can't see if anybody raises their hands or has questions. So somebody just stop me.
I'll let you know, David.
Okay, thank you.
And so yes, if folks, this is Councilor Bencomo, if folks have questions, you can, the raise hand feature is towards the bottom of, on the right hand side. And you can raise your hand and I'll call you. And it looks like Councilor Flores has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Dollahan. So in looking at the definitions, it seems that some of them are very vague and actually kind of arbitrary in terms of enforcement if we were to enforce them. Going back, for example, to number 3, division 1, And going back, for example, in Division 3, Natalie, would you please go back to that so we can all be on the same, literally on the same page?
What was the specific definition? I'm sorry, I missed that.
The definition was in the same area where David was discussing attractive nuisance. Oh, there we go. They were numbered nuisance. Number 3, whatever is dangerous, see, after number 3. So whatever is dangerous to human life or is detrimental to health, determined by a health officer. I mean, there's no standard there, no objective standard to apply. So it would be subjective depending on a health officer. The other is overcrowding a room with occupants. I mean, what overcrowding? You know, and also number 5. So that was, I just addressed 3 and 4. Number 5, insufficient or illumination.
Madam Chair, I can help with this real quick. So on items 4, 5, and 6, I believe are further enumerated within the code. That's where we establish the occupancy limits, the ventilation, lighting, and sanitary sewer and plumbing facilities. That's elsewhere in the code. And then item 3 would be anything that a health officer from the Health or Environment Department determines without limiting us as to, and I'm not a lawyer, and our city attorney who drafted this is not here, but I would venture to guess that if a health officer determined that there was a substance in a room that presented a contamination of some form or a communicable disease because of its existence or whatever was in that substance in a room, they could determine that that was dangerous to human life or detrimental to health. I know, for example, the Environment Department is involved when you have meth houses because they have to determine a house that was used to cook meth usually ends up, the substances are pervasive throughout the structure, and they have to do testing on it to make sure that it's all clear. I mean, it gets in electrical sockets, it gets behind baseboards, it gets into flooring and carpeting and every nook and cranny. So that's why monitoring of those substances are controlled by the health department or the environment department. So it is left purposely vague because we never know what they're going to see. But we can bring this up with the attorney because this is just a draft. And
okay,
I know
I
there
understand.
are.
But my concern, Mr. Dallahan, Madam Chair, is that is this going to be the language that actually goes into the housing code?
This is the housing code, yes.
Okay, so it's still, if it's within that code, it still has to be definite. I mean, the language has to be a little bit tighter, or at least cross-reference the reference. So if it's going to be as determined by the health officer, would have to say pursuant to section yada yada blah 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 yada yada, you know, whatever. Because you know, someone can walk in and arbitrarily say that, for example, the overcrowding in a room with occupants. I mean, when I was growing up and we had our immigrant families coming in, you know, my family coming from, you know, different parts of Mexico. I know I shared my bedroom with, my sister and I shared our tiny bedroom with 2 aunts and my grandmother. I mean, would that be determined to be overcrowded? And, you know, it wasn't a tiny bedroom, but it was maybe 10 by 10. Yeah, that's tiny for 4 or 5 people. So, so that's my concern, you know, overcrowding a room with occupants pursuant to whose standard. And we do have to have an objective standard in order to do any of this. Otherwise, and then insufficient ventilation and illumination. I mean, what if you're too poor to, you know, have a big window or, have a big fan, or what does ventilation mean? So anyway, I just want to call it to, I just want, and I mean, and then if we're going to have, and then you're saying, well, a lot of this is driven by our building codes. Well, then make cross-reference in that regard so that we know what these enforcement officers are going to be looking at. That it's just, I don't know.
Understood. With the exception of Madam Chair and Councilor Flores, with the exception of item 3, I understand your concern and it's legitimate. I think the spacing, the occupancy, the ventilation, illumination, heating and cooling, plumbing is contained elsewhere within this code.
Yeah.
That's where section 30-6 begins. So it talks about, so if you're comfortable, we'll move forward with
Yes.
those.
Thank you. Maybe I was premature in my statements because they will be covered subsequently, Mr. Dallahan.
Yes, they are.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks, Counselor.
So Division 2 starts the space and occupancy standards. So the very first one is 30-6. It talks about room dimensions. It includes ceiling heights of no less than 7 feet, except when provided by the code. There are exceptions. There are older buildings within this community that I know of that have lower heights, some older adobes in the Mesquite Historic District that will have heights lower than that, but that's acceptable for the time it was built. It also talks about where it's measured from, no less than center of the seat. Beams cannot be more than 48 inches on center. The measurement is the bottom of those beams. Under new construction, we don't anticipate that being an issue. It's really under older construction that might be an issue. With slope ceilings, it talks about how high it is in half the area. And then for down ceilings, no less than it has to be required to be 2/3 of the area and not be less than 7 feet. Item B is 100 floor spacing. Each dwelling shall have at least 150 square feet of floor for the first occupant, and each additional 100 additional space for each and every occupant thereof. There's your occupancy standard. In every dwelling unit of 2 or more rooms, then they occupied for sleeping purposes, it's 70 square foot per person, and then at least 45 square feet for each additional occupant there. So that addresses your occupancy limits for both general spacing and rooms. That far exceeds the building code now, but those are minimums. And then width talks about how wide a kitchen must be, water closet, which are restrooms, it talks about those. So that's building dimensions. Natalie, if you'll scroll down from there. And then there's an exception for efficiency dwelling units or living units in an apartment house. And that's 220 square feet for each occupant beyond the first 2. Then 30-7, scrolling down, is natural light and ventilation. And it talks about the difference between guest rooms, dormitories, and habitable rooms in a dwelling unit. It talks about a natural light, exterior lighting, minimum of 10 square feet. Then origins of light, and then in the exceptions, and then it goes to mechanical ventilation, that's airflow and so forth, and then same way with hallways. And then 30-8 talks about sanitation. It shall have a bathroom equipped with facilities for a water closet, which is a toilet, lavatory, and either a bathtub or shower. These standards are all pretty basic. Kitchens, for example, have to have sinks. And if there's a wood sink or sinks made of absorbent material, those would be prohibited. And it talks about plumbing fixtures, water closet compartments. Those are spaces, essentially toilet spaces of the bathroom.
Madam Chair, David, I believe we have a question in the audience if the chairman would acknowledge Mr. Beard.
Oh, yes, my apologies. I didn't see your hand, Mr. Beard.
No problem, thank you. Sorry, I got a really squeaky chair. Can you scroll back up to the room sizes? This is for an affordable housing code, right?
This is a housing code in general. This is not
Yeah.
affordable housing. It's all dwellings.
Okay, so I mean, this is extremely limiting for a builder, especially one trying to build affordable housing. I mean, a minimum, it's easy to argue that a guest bedroom is only going to have one occupant. Although who knows how many kids somebody's going to put in that bedroom. But if I say that's got to be a minimum of 150 square feet, and then what's the other apartment? There's additional 100 square feet per person. So I figure, I mean, your average guest bedroom size is 10 by 12, so 120 square feet or so. And then to say I've got to have it, if they're going to put 2 kids in there, they've got to have,
250.
250. That requires an additional, 250 minus 120 is what, an additional 90 square feet to that room. Which again, you could argue, okay, there's only supposed to be one person in that bedroom, so it's okay to have it be a minimum of 150, but that already takes up 30 more square feet of the house. So now the house has to be 30 square feet bigger. Your sales price per square foot, say you're really good at $100 a square foot, that's another, $3,000 on the house. But then you look at even, say, a master bedroom, a really nice master bedroom is only 224 square feet. Arguably, the master bedroom is supposed to be for 2 people, so that's got to meet that minimum of 250 square feet. So there's another 30 square feet you got to add. So now we're talking $6,000, and that's only on a 2-bedroom house. I mean, this idea is very, very restrictive and cost prohibitive as far as affordable housing goes. And I know that's a major issue in our city.
David, just real quick, Mr. Beard, actually first, Councilor Flores, will you mute yourself, porfa? And thank you. And then, Ben, can I ask what your recommendation would be?
I guess, and I'm probably the one with the a lot of the background noise. I apologize. I got my loud child in the background here, but I don't know that we need to put a minimum room size. I mean, I've got one home right now that has a fairly large master bedroom on the 2nd floor, but it has a very small, probably 8 by 8 after you take out the closet bedroom also on the 2nd floor, because it's just a very small floor plan. 1,400 square foot floor plan, 2-story plan that's all that the lot would allow us to build without building a 3rd story. So to fit within setbacks and to be a decent sized home, that's just all we could fit. So is it ideal? No, but we've had 4 of them sold already, and because it fits their needs. So I worry about specifying a size of a bedroom. I think that should be dictated by the market, not by regulation.
Thanks for your feedback. You're on mute, David.
Natalie put a note in there to reevaluate those sizes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Natalie, let's jump ahead to where we were before. I think we were on sanitation, talks about fixtures, water closet, bathroom.
Can I
ask
These are all pretty general.
Yeah, sorry, I just saw your hand go up, Mayor Pro Tem. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the feedback from Mr. Beard. I don't know, David, if you or Natalie, in the time that you've been doing this and working, I realize that Jennifer Baker Brown isn't available, but what have you seen? I mean, and actually Mortgage Authority, Finance Authority, I think probably sees a lot of this stuff. And so I just want to be mindful that we have lots of different scenarios in our city and other places where people take advantage, right, of that. And I also am really interested in small tiny homes concept, right? So I guess I just want to hear from other folks that see throughout the state and locally why this would be put here. You all that have the expertise and experience, can you give me some feedback?
Sure. And this is Natalie. I'll jump in real quick before I let Sonia pipe in for MFA. Generally, on a staff level, we recommend 2+1 per bedroom. So in an efficiency, we could see up to 3 people. Again, a 1 bedroom, we could see up to 6 people. So that's kind of the rule of thumb we like to use for some of our HUD programs. But I'll defer to Sonia and see if she sees something different.
Sure. I mean, I would like to know, I guess, where that standard comes from. I mean, overcrowding certainly has health consequences. And if that's kind of what that's rooted in, it might be a reasonable regulation. It is a balancing act between wanting to create units that are affordable, but also wanting to provide units that are also livable. So, you know, if it's that this is rooted in something that shows this is kind of the minimum area you want in a house, knowing that more people might be living in it, perhaps it's reasonable. However, if it's kind of doing the best you can within what's zoned for that area, maybe it's worth revising to some extent. I guess my question would be, where did the standard come from? And I guess what's the purpose for it?
Yeah.
Is it
Madam Chair, Councilor Gondra, I would go along with Sonia's comments. It's a matter, it's a balancing act between overcrowding. I've seen situations where, because of affordability issues, a tenant or a family moves into a smaller unit because that's what they can afford. But it can lead to overcrowding, what would be considered safe. But I will also know that there are cultural acceptances of where families, we have multiple generations of families living in a smaller home, in some part because of affordability, but in another part because of choice. And so the standard rule of 2+1, that recognizes, and even HUD recognizes it in public housing settings, that the living room can be used as sleeping space. And so that it's a balancing act. But
Sure.
I mean, some families would be perfectly happy with 4 kids in a bedroom. I've seen a situation where a family put their kids, they had 3 kids, and they put them in the master bedroom, and then the mom and dad moved into the non-master bedroom in a 2-bedroom unit. In that situation, it was a matter of convenience, but it was really driven by affordability. So we do need to look at this on the whole, but it is a balancing act between affordability and not overcrowding.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all. I think Mayor Pro Tem, did you have more questions? And then
I did.
Mr. Beard, I'll get to you right after.
I just wanted for there to be, you know, from folks that live and breathe affordable housing, you know, HUD, just to weigh in on that. I didn't know if you had seen something, this kind of standard in other housing codes. Just trying to, because it's not my expertise, but I certainly, you and I both know, Councilor Bencomo, we've seen many people overcrowding just because that's what they could afford. Sometimes it's multi-generational and a culture, you know, part of one's culture. And so I don't want to with something like this, I understand the importance of it, but I also don't want to be insensitive, right, to families' needs. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro
Also-
Tem, and I appreciated you writing that in there, Natalie. Thank you.
I have seen, Madam Chair and board members, I have seen a housing code that had some more basic or lower square footage standards, but then it imposed per person limits in sleeping rooms, like bedrooms or spaces that could be used for sleeping, such as living areas. So I have seen both those. Regardless, it can be problematic either way in the community. So
Yeah.
it's not ideal, but it's the purpose behind a housing code is to try to create better living situations
Right.
for everyone involved. That doesn't mean that it helps by having an affordable housing crisis. And we have an affordable housing crisis in the sense nationwide, we don't have enough affordable housing for people to live in that's of a quality standard. So that's the balancing act that we face.
Yes.
It is trying, I don't want to speak for the attorney and we'll need to follow up, but this is trying to address the most egregious of the housing standards in the community to maintain a basic level where landlords or property owners haven't done that. And it makes a structure truly uninhabitable. That's the purpose behind this.
Yes.
And I've seen some pretty egregious examples in other communities, and I know there are some in Las Cruces, but not as bad as in other communities. But we have affordable housing difficulties nationwide, not just Las
Right.
Cruces.
Yes, thank you, David. I agree with that context. I'm going to come to Mr. Beard and then Councilor Flores, you're after that.
Thank you. Hearing the discussion, I think it's really important to remember that we can regulate what is built, and we do through building codes and other things. But we can't always regulate. It's not necessarily enforceable to regulate how people are going to live in their homes. You could buy a 3,000 square foot home with, 6 bedrooms and 5 bathrooms and still overcrowd it if you really wanted to. With all the money in the world, and you could overcrowd the heck out of it just because that's how you want to live. So I just think putting these things in, if they're not addressed in a building code requiring minimum square footages, I would be really hesitant, especially in a community like Las Cruces where affordable housing is so desperately needed. I would be very hesitant to put in any kind of room size restrictions. Unless it was through another means, through the building code. I mean, I agree. Let's not let builders build or investors remodel apartments into these ridiculous 200 square foot and charge $1,000 a month for it. That's not where we're not New York. We're not LA. Let's keep Las Cruces affordable and for a decent square footage apartment or home for that matter. But I'm looking at one of my floor plans that I'm building right now. 8 of these homes. Sales price on these is average $150,000 on the north side of town, kind of behind the Albertsons on North Main. Front bedroom is 10 by 10. Other bedroom is 10 by 10. Master is 15 by 12. So we're talking 100 square foot bedrooms, 2 of those, and then 180 square foot master bedroom. So, yes, I would anticipate that's going to sell to a family of 2 parents and 2 or 3 children. But by those rules, I would have to eliminate one of the bedrooms or drastically reduce the living space to make each of these big bedrooms big enough to fit that minimum requirement. And I think there, in addition to the overcrowding issue, I think you also have to take into account you know, what do people really want? Do they want a 2-bedroom house that is got 2 big bedrooms, or do they want a 3-bedroom house, even if a couple of the bedrooms are a little bit smaller? In new home sales, people are looking at numbers of bedrooms and bathrooms, not size necessarily of bedrooms and bathrooms. When you get into a higher price point, certainly people are looking at what's the size of the bedroom and is it big enough for their needs or their wants? And that's an affordability, or not really an affordability issue at that point. But this particular floor plan, the lots, I've got the home as big as I can make it. It's 1,200 square feet. We didn't do a garage because it wouldn't fit, and we wanted to allow as much living space as possible for that $150,000 price point. So I just worry about regulating stuff like that in the future, or you know, and people can always live how they want to live. So it's difficult to regulate that and say, let's only let people build a certain amount, especially when it's going to hurt affordable housing.
Thank you, Mr. Beard. Hold on, David. I also, before I get to some other folks, because there's other board members who have things to add, I did want to just note that I think that there is a middle here. I think I don't necessarily think this is to allow the market to drive everything and have zero regulation, and then overtly restrictive regulation. There's definitely a middle. No, we cannot regulate how people choose to live in their homes. However, I think there's a need for creating some regulation that doesn't take folks don't take advantage of a situation like we have in Las Cruces, where we need affordable housing and then are creating spaces for perhaps low-income families of 6 who then are going to get that tiny apartment, even though that might cause additional stress factors to their family because it was a thing they could afford. So I think there's definitely a middle here that we could find. I would love to see, perhaps we can go back, Natalie, to Jennifer, our attorney, and get some of these best practices from across the country in terms of what this can look like, instead of us having to decide that immediately today. But I do think there's a middle here. And then David, do you mind if I go to Councilor Flores and then Mr. Olvera before coming back to you? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, David. And thank you, Mr. Beard. You bring up a very good paradigm there, and I agree with Chair Bencomo that we can't regulate how people choose to live. But I know in my district, I've had 2 occasions where some of these homes are probably priced minimally $300,000, perhaps more. I mean, the homes I'm speaking about, and they were, however, rentals. And so we're looking at a housing code that affects everyone. And there was one home where there were 12 cars out front, and this constituent kept complaining, and the place was just, I mean, I drove by and it was terrible. Trash cans were out in the front yard. There were a number of trash cans there, and God knows how they got those. I don't know, the city really, I've never seen a house with more than 2 trash cans out front, you know, the big ones. So, so I agree with our chair, and then I see your point of view as well. And what you've raised, and Mayor Pro Tem brought up a very good thing, because when I first joined this committee, whenever it was, we talked about tiny homes and making homes possible. And then, if you all recall, we had a work session with Mr. Schumann, who taught, you know, he does the community planning stuff, and is also an attorney, and he was talking about how there could be community housing. And I talked about that with John Moscato, and he said that who you all know is a developer, and basically in the East Mesa area in Gil Sorg's district and mine. And what he said was that you know, we were talking about, I was talking about affordable housing, and he said, I think you're confusing it with low income housing. So, I mean, everything we're talking about is something, and that's why this housing code somehow throws me off a little bit, because it's also addressing a lot of the building codes, which is, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen what the state has. I haven't seen other codes, but I know this all started primarily because we were interested in the landlord-tenant or lack thereof, any kind of ordinance that we had addressing landlord-tenant situations. And of course, it's important to have all, if we have a tenant who is renting. So this isn't just housing for people who buy, it's for people who rent. And I missed last month's meeting, I'm really sorry. But as far as, so there's two issues here that concern me. One is we talk about affordable housing and Mr. Moscato, and I think that Ms. Unruh would be able to address that far better, and Mr. Olvera. There's a difference between affordable housing and low income altogether. It's like two different, it's like, you know, talking about softball and baseball type of thing, or volleyball and tennis or something. You have a net, but it's, you know, it's different. So the other issue is as to whether these regulations, these regulations within the ordinance would prevent us from having perhaps community housing and tiny homes. And I know that I'm only familiar with tiny homes. What I watched on TV, I think it was on the HGTV channel. And some of those tiny homes, I mean, they're 400 square feet and up to about, depending on how many people, I mean, excuse me, and depending on the design, you could have as many as 4 people in those 400 square feet, just because of the way it's done. So those are the things that I think we really have to look at. And I think we would all benefit from a presentation from someone who really knows about affordable housing versus low income, and how that income, how that impacts on community housing development, and having tiny homes. So I don't know if we're going anywhere with this today, only because there's just too many areas that we have to be aware of at the same time, and it's hard to follow the bouncing ball. We're kind of going all over the place.
Thanks, Councilor Flores. I think it's, given that it's a draft, I think it's important we get some of these things out now so we can keep discussing them. I'm going to go to Juan Olvera next.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that the Housing Authority has what is called occupancy standards for either public housing and for the voucher program. So we have those, and we follow some of the guidelines from the federal government, but the Housing Authority basically has in their administrative plan basically set those occupancy standards, which basically is goes by the number of bedrooms and how many people can be by bedroom. So we can share those later if needed.
Yeah, that would be great, Mr. Olvera, if you can share those with Natalie, and then maybe we can discuss those next month.
Sure.
And then since you're on now, what do you Councilor Flores just brought up this difference between low income and affordable housing. Can you speak to that?
Well, basically, low income is basically considered 80% and above or average median income. Very low income and extremely low income is below that. And basically we're talking about sorry, I'm having trouble with this. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Basically we're talking about extremely low income is when basically the average median income is 30% or below. And basically the housing authorities are the only ones that serve that population.
Okay. Thank you,
You're welcome.
Mr. Olvera. Okay, I'm gonna go. I have several hands up here. Who was next? I think Jan, I'm gonna come to you.
Jan's raising her hand for me because I have the raised
Oh.
hand. But again, Natalie Green, I just wanted to cover a couple things. One, this housing ordinance is going to be tied to the nuisance ordinance. And then we have to remember what Jennifer was telling us last month is that a lot of this is going to be complaint based. So we won't be measuring every single house in Las Cruces. Really, it's going to be a tenant that's calling us, a landlord that's calling us, and then a lot of how this is regulated or how we move to remediation. It'll happen. It could happen through the court process, and we go into court losing. So when we're talking about some of these issues, we're really talking about the worst of the worst that is a public health, a public nuisance issue. So it's not just your average home that was built yesterday. It's really going to be the worst of the worst. So I just want to make sure that we're framing our conversation around that. But all the comments have been really great, and staff is taking notes on all of this.
That's really important context, Natalie. Thank you. Sonia?
Just it's semantic, but a lot of the times we do refer to subsidized housing or low-income housing as affordable housing, in part to destigmatize it. Saying to Section 8 or the projects or low-income housing has been associated with a lot of not in my backyard attitudes, and it's affordable housing for middle-income people is certainly important, and that's also kind of why it's used often in the branding of subsidized housing. And that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. That's very important also, Sonia. I appreciate that. Okay, David, back to you.
I want to hit on two things real quick. We will also, I'll ask staff to work with Jennifer and look at the actual building code square footages, because I believe they are different under new construction for each of these. I want to talk about low income versus affordable housing. Low income, I see it as an income bracket. It is comparing a family's household income against an area median. That's low income. There's extremely low income, like Mr. Olvera said. There's also high income. Affordable housing is really is relative to what that family can afford based on their current income, and we need to improve the market. But we're, as a nation, we are no longer building low income housing or what is considered semantically projects. If you look at the new affordable multifamily housing development that is being created either through tax credits or other mechanisms, even rehab of older Section 8 project-based housing, you're building new affordable housing that is of a high quality standard. And so let's keep that in mind. Our objective by creating more affordable housing is not to make it too cost burden for people that they can't afford it, but it's really about making a quality newer constructed housing that is affordable for all income groups. And so let's just keep that in mind. But going back to Natalie's point is, we're trying to address the worst of the worst, and we don't have it as bad in some communities, in our community as compared to others. All right, so jumping through the rest of this, and Section 8 is through sanitation. It talks about impervious materials in wet environments, grab bars, towel bars, where they'll be attached, and so forth. Showers and room separators and the like. These are just standards. Then the structural requirements are weather protected from the elements and to exclude dampness. All wood shall be protected from termite damage and decay as provided by the building code. These are some of the most basic of items. Mechanical requirements, we're ensuring that we have heating and cooling, appropriate wood burning or fuel burning heaters are not permitted unless they're vented appropriately and have to be installed to the manufacturer specifications. Electrical equipment has to be safe and accommodating for wiring and appliances, both in any room, habitable room, have to have a minimum number of outlets. These are all basic stuff coming from the building code anyway. It's just a remuneration. But it may be a situation in some of the older houses and more egregiously unmaintained structures that there might be key criteria that the home needs to be upgraded to in some regards to address these minimums. Okay, going on.
David,
Natalie. Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Beard has a question for you.
Sorry to keep interrupting. Going back to Natalie's comment, is this, I understood uniform housing code would apply to all new construction as well as existing homes. Is that not the case? Is this only affecting existing homes?
No, I would argue that it applies to all housing because even new housing becomes existing housing at some point in the near future. So yes.
That's what I assumed that it would apply. I understood a comment Natalie made to imply that it was only affecting applicable to older housing, not new construction as well.
And Natalie's trying to jump in. Natalie, I feel like I can't hear you.
No problem.
Oh, there you are. Yes.
And Natalie, for the record, and it would apply not just to housing, it's going to apply to all buildings. So even it's a misnomer where it says uniform housing code, but it applies to all buildings. And again, what I meant is enforcement. So we won't be enforcing it. We won't be checking every house in Las Cruces. It'll be a very complaint-driven process. We just don't have the staff to monitor every single house.
So existing homes, older homes are on that complaint basis, but new construction is all going to have to comply with these requirements, correct?
If adopted as presented, yes.
Okay, that's what I thought was the case. Just wanted to confirm that.
Let me rephrase that. Whatever is finally, if adopted, would have to apply to new construction as well.
Sure. Whatever is adopted as the uniform housing code, it applies retroactively via complaint to all existing homes, but will immediately apply to all construction going forward.
You are correct. That is
not just housing, but also commercial buildings.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
I imagine that this is like the floor, right? Like bare minimum.
This is intended to be the minimum, and while it's a uniform housing code, and Natalie's correct, it is intended to address any building used for intended human habitation.
Thank you, David.
So you could have a commercial building that was not necessarily built as, say it was originally built as a shopping center, but over time it changes into something, the owner comes in and converts it to efficiency apartments. That's kind of an extreme example, but you could have that. Well, that's where this code really kicks in, because it's the daytime occupancy of a commercial building versus the long-term day in, day out habitation of a building is different. And there are different standards based on the building code. So
thanks. And oh, sure, Mr. Beard.
Sorry, one final point of clarification. So I'm looking at section B there at the top of the screen. It says unvented fuel burning heaters shall not be permitted. That would already violate existing code, but that has to be in here because this is going to apply retroactively. Where building codes don't apply retroactively, this covers that. That's why we need some things that I would consider duplication of code. We need that because this is now going to go back and retroactively affect existing. Is that correct?
Yes, that's the easiest way to say it. And using that as an example, I'm a landlord and I haven't upgraded the heating on this, on a unit to unvented fuel burning, a gas burning fireplace or whatever that is the heating source. Well, that presents a hazard to the occupants. So there is some responsibility with property maintenance and property ownership. And so that's where this is coming from. And the complaint driven will be where we have to start. Like Natalie said, we don't have time to inspect each and every home.
Right. I just wanted to clarify that because I'd made an argument last week about, or excuse me, last month in our meeting about trying to not duplicate codes and have things in multiple places where it's already restricted. But this needs to be here because it is going to apply retroactively where building codes don't. So it does need to quote unquote duplicate code because it's covering a different area.
Right, because at one point, an old structure that was built with unvented fuel burning heater may have been appropriate for the code at the time, but it's not now, so it hasn't been maintained properly.
Now it needs to be updated to a vented fuel burning.
Right, exactly.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you. And then Councilor Flores.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Mr. Beard, you bring up interesting questions. And Mr. Dollahan, you know, I'm not sure about, there's ex post facto laws, you know, where you can't have laws apply retroactively to a situation that existed prior to the enactment of the laws or the new ordinance in this case. So I think if Jennifer, if that could be addressed to legal so that we can have that clarified. And perhaps I'm not understanding this entirely, but it just seems to me that, and even though it's complaint driven, I think that a lot of this, I keep going back to, you know, my context was Natalie Green, retroactive. Okay, so thank you, Natalie, for taking that note. So yeah, it's a retroactive. It's called ex post facto laws, which are totally illegal, unlawful, unconstitutional. So but I don't know exactly what the context is here, and you know, and even though it's complaint driven, if the complaints are going to be from neighbors who know that they go into another home or someone, whatever, or maybe in a landlord tenant, in a tenant situation. So, and that's the part that you know, maybe when we get to the landlord tenant section of this ordinance, we'll address it there, but those are my concerns.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Flores. And then David, from now on, I'm going to wait till you get to the end of a section, and then I'm going to invite you all to put in your questions so I don't keep interrupting David in the middle of a paragraph. So at the end of if you raise your hand, I'll call you at the end of a section. So David, pause at the end of the section so I can.
No problem.
Thank you.
So we're through electrical equipment, basic ventilation of the building code, mechanical codes, and that's the end of this section.
Any further questions on that section? Mr. Beard.
Addressing Ms. Flores' comments, I would think in building, at least, if you're going to remodel a home, for example, you have to go get a new permit, and then the parts of the home that are being remodeled have to follow new code, not code of the home when it was built. So I would think any change, whether you're changing from homeowner to now making it a tenant situation, would be a change that would allow this new code to go into effect. And maybe I'm mistaken. Certainly the attorney should address that. I would guess that those ex post facto laws, we could get around those to impact existing housing by a change in status of the building.
Thank you. All right, David.
Section 11 is related to exits. Talks about have each dwelling unit or guest room, because there are guest room quarters, shall have a direct access to the outside or a public corridor, like a hallway in an apartment complex or something like that. Again, reference to the building code. It talks about sleeping rooms above the 4th floor. Talking about emergency escape in that regards, and then escape or rescue windows in sleeping areas has a minimum net clearance of square feet. That too references the building code. a lot of these items are related to that retrofit or long-term continued occupancy by buildings, where we know in this community as nationwide that people have not maintained their property, including rental housing, and that they do need to make the time to make investments to upgrade and make it more habitable as time has progressed. Section 12 is fire protection. That just talks about fire resistant construction and fire extinguisher systems and so forth. The next division all talks about substandard buildings. The first one starts with defining what that is. And then the next subsection under that is inadequate sanitation, what that all involves. And again, those are really the basic inadequacy, that you have none of those things, or they're not properly operating or maintained. The next section is structural hazards, inadequate or deteriorative foundations, floor supports, and the like, walls that are not correct or split, lean, list, or buckle, a varied list. Bulging fireplaces, that's a hazard. And then this gets to nuisance and an unlicensed vacant building, broken windows or doors where people can break in or get in easily, and the like. That's just to prohibit. This is in the most basic form, where we don't want people to have properties that are not maintained and secured from the outside, whether it's occupied or not. Broken windows are the worst thing to neighborhood deterioration. And then the rest go through wiring, plumbing, mechanical equipment, and weather protection. Fire, faulty materials and construction, inadequate maintenance, that could be a big issue. And then inadequate exits. Sorry, I shouldn't laugh. And then fire protection again. So Division 5 is where it becomes the administration and enforcement section. This is where the city would be building a program. Who's responsible for enforcing it? That would be the city manager through his designee, and they have the powers therein. And then it talks about proceedings and orders. This is very similar to what's contained within the draft nuisance abatement ordinance. Telling people you're put on notice, here's the address, here's what's wrong, information that needs to be shared by the city manager or his designee, to his or her designee, to address the problems. Our objective behind this ordinance is compliance to make the structure more habitable. It's not necessarily to look at demolition or removal of the structure, but that is a possibility in some regards, and that would involve court action or city council action due to condemnation. Natalie, if you can stop right there on statement of advising. Scroll up just a little. That the person has a right to an appeal from the notice and order of the city manager excluding demolition to the Planning and Zoning Commission. In my last discussions and at the last meeting, that's where City Attorney Vega Brown, and you'll notice Planning and Zoning Commission is highlighted. because we may want to, rather than putting that as an additional responsibility on the Planning and Zoning Commission, is create a hearing officer procedure or an administrative hearing office to hear these type of issues, rather than putting that on the Planning and Zoning Commission. And then there's the service notice, and then recordation of notice and order. And one thing on the repair, vacancy, and securing or demolition, that would require whoever's doing the work to secure a permit to correct the problem. They still have to get a permit to correct any issues. And then there's notice to vacate. Because of the status of the structure, it could be deemed that the occupants have to exit the building or vacate the building. And then there's an appeal process, and I think that's the rest of it goes through there. But that is all subject to change. And then it talks about how the actual hearing would be conducted, the form of the hearing. It's a very judicious or process, regimented process, I should say. And then there's an active enforcement component. That's after the hearing, if someone chooses to have a hearing. And then there's notices on the building that it can't be occupied and so forth. And then 30-15 is talking about work. If the city has to cause the work to be done, how that would be happened, and how it would be a lien against the property. So next section is on inspections and fees. This is a requested inspection may be made payment upon a $50 fee for the first dwelling unit and 15 each additional unit for the offset of city administration costs. This is if somebody's trying to buy a new building, like they're a buyer of the building. And I pointed out to the city attorney, I thought this fee should not be established by ordinance, but should be taken out of the ordinance and put in a resolution, because our cost should have some sense of recovery on them. And $50 for the first one and each additional is a little low. That's my opinion. And then last item is right of entry procedures. I think that's pretty close. We're pretty close to the end. Substandard buildings, illegal activity. Here is something that was brought up last. Go to the vacant building license. Vacant building maintenance. 15 days prior, this is a building maintenance license. And I think that was one of the concerns for Mayor Pro Tem Gondra. This is in there. When I read this, I was concerned if it was vacant for a longer period of time than just 15 days, if they're alternating, a tenant leaves and a new tenant moves in and the landlord is planning to rent it again. But I think 15 days is a little bit short. It's when it becomes longer than that and it's planned to be vacant for a longer period of time. So I think we need to look at that number. But this is within the ordinance, and it creates essentially a new type of license. Natalie, you can add to that. Does it only apply to rental property? as well. He's back.
Thanks for taking such good notes. Are there any questions while we wait for David? Nope. All right, go ahead, David.
Sorry, and then payment of relocation costs, that if based on the status of the building, that it's not safe for occupation, then we could force an owner under this ordinance to pay for relocation of the tenants to a more safe structure while the work's being done or corrective action is taken and so forth. That's why we, at a staff level, in discussion with the city attorney, need to establish a program, because we're going to have to front some relocation expenses if it gets to that point. We've done relocation on federal projects, and it can get expensive. So we're going to need staff and set aside funds for relocation, because inevitably it's going to happen.
Mayor Pro Tem has a question while Natalie's taking a note.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to weigh in on the whole idea of creating a hearing office. I think that's really important, because I think about from the time I was elected, re-elected, and the conversations that I've had with Natalie and Vera Simona at the time, I think there are, I just can't imagine planning and zoning taking the number of issues that come to community development, specifically vis-a-vis the unit that now Natalie Green oversees. And so I think it's important to have that person, and that we move into a so the hearing officer reviews these things, works with codes. I would assume that it would be in connection with the NAT, the neighborhood, and what one of the staff people that already works with Jennifer Baker Brown with some of these vacant or homes that have issues or commercial buildings. So I just wanted to say that I think that would be, for me, really important. And just to clarify, I think Councilor Flores and I were under the impression that there is a tenant landlord kind of provision to this, and there isn't. And so I've asked Jennifer if she can work on something like that, because I think it's really important. I think when you talk to Natalie, and she can talk to you more at length about this, the number of calls that they're getting. In fact, I got a call today from an individual that is in a HUD situation, I guess, and in one of the nicer parts of town, struggling with the landlord, and it just has gone into, unfortunately, a systems issue. She's African American. She's very targeted, and so if we had a hearing officer or some group that can see this, and I know that it's overwhelming to from the perspective of not having enough staff to get this done. I think we need to build it. We need to build it because nobody else is taking care of these kinds of situations other than the tenant, who sort of has to navigate through these uncharted waters, who typically doesn't have funding available to sue a landlord and or landlords having issues with tenants, right, that are irresponsible and trash, you know, the units and such. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I think you're absolutely right. We were all sort of expecting that landlord tenant piece. So you spoke with Jennifer. I think we can definitely follow up, and maybe Natalie, we can add that discussion to next week. I'm sorry, month, if possible. If not, we'll definitely put it on the list. Thank you. All right, David, do you want to? I just want to note time. It's 3:21. So wrap us up, and then maybe we'll do final.
I think we're pretty well done. Some of these highlights. This is really to the end of it. It's to create the process for a hearing, because in our objective behind this ordinance and nuisance abatement is really for compliance, not for gotcha or punishment. So hopefully we can avoid an adversarial situation, but that doesn't always work out. And so you need that adjudication or the hearing process. And so violations and penalties are the last two portions, I believe. And essentially we only have the authority to cite into municipal court, which is a 90 days in jail and $500 a day fine, but that's pretty much it. That doesn't mean that in some of the more egregious issues under state law and the nuisance ordinance, you could end up in district court having a district court judge compelling people to make the corrections, like Jennifer talked about last month. So that's it, Madam Chair.
Thank you, David. And then someone tuning in messaged me regarding the ex post facto issue, perhaps only applying to criminal cause of action and not civil. And I imagine this falls under civil.
Yes.
But again, we'll have to check with Jennifer. Yes.
Correct.
Great. Thank you, David, very much for taking over Jennifer's presentation on that. I really appreciate it. Since we're about to wrap up here, actually, any last thoughts, questions on that before we move on? Mr. Beard?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, the landlord tenant situation, wouldn't that fall under more of the nuisance housing code as opposed to the uniform housing code? And I don't know, I'm just asking.
I think it applies on the situation, because the nuisance ordinance is much broader than this as to what constitutes a nuisance. But it could be only a housing maintenance issue or a building maintenance issue, and they do cross-reference and work together. So, but the nuisance ordinance from last month is much broader in the potential violations. So yes, you could have a bad tenant or a bad occupant, I should say, that is doing things that the landlord may not be aware of, that is creating a nuisance or a problem in the neighborhood, or the health, safety, and welfare of the and peace and tranquility of the neighborhood. So there are provisions in which that could be addressed.
Thank you. Great. So what's next, Natalie? I think yes, future items for review. Thank you. So we have quite a long list. We debated putting it all in here or not, but it is quite a long list. So these are some of the things that we discussed at our first meeting. I wonder what would be a good use of our time? Should we revisit some of the items brought up today regarding the uniform housing code? Or I think, well, that might depend on Jennifer as well, or some of the follow-ups we had and how much time they need to do the research. So perhaps we should continue down the list. Okay, great.
I would recommend that we take time to come back to the housing and nuisance ordinance. It's going to take time for some cleanup and clarification.
Great. Yes, absolutely. I definitely think next month we should talk about the Elevate Las Cruces, some of those shorter term recommendations and look into those. Councilor Flores?
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, as far as our future items for review, I think that the Elevate Las Cruces, I would like to say that the state land trust acquisition, state land trust acquisition, I think is of utmost importance insofar as, and I brought this up with the mayor as well, or wherever, that, whatever, that perhaps the city can look into acquiring some of that land, not by lease, but by purchase, because, you know, our secretary there, Richard Garcia, is really, you know, she's mandated to make money off of the state land trust, the trust land that we have in the state. And I'd like our city to perhaps buy that so that we can get that, maybe the community housing that Mr. Schumann spoke about, and have people have the pride of ownership for their homes. And so that is something that I would really like to see addressed, and perhaps we can move it up on the future items for review, because I know that some developers, with all due respect to developers, are getting, they're getting leases, and I think they're getting leases because they're anticipating that they'll buy eventually. So thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thanks, Councilor Flores. Yes, so these aren't necessarily in any order, but I'm glad you're mentioning that you'd like this one sooner than later. Sonia?
Yes, thank you. MFA produces a housing needs assessment for each county, and it kind of overviews data and housing indicators for Doña Ana County. And so it wouldn't be an urgent priority, but I could eventually share a brief version of that, like a 10 or 15-minute version, if people were kind of interested in just checking out the stats of things like percentage of renters or number of renters or housing condition issues in the county, if that would be kind of an interesting briefing for the group.
I love that, Sonia. And actually the next item on here is talking about future agency spotlights. And we were hoping to get some volunteers today to go next. Perhaps that's you.
Certainly, and I know Mesilla Valley Community of Hope is also on the line, and there would be a great one to have share some of their projects.
Yes, we'll definitely get to everybody. So it's up to you. I think what you just mentioned is really interesting. Yeah.
Sure.
Natalie, for the record, we will be doing a city-specific housing needs assessment. So
that might be more relevant.
We're about to start our consolidated plan, and that's usually when we do that. So we'll be getting that presentation likely over the next months. And then we are rolling out our facilitation tool, and part of that, there is going to be an emphasis on policy-related actions. So these meetings will be less information and more policy-oriented. So while we can keep the agency spotlight, staff does want to limit that to only a few minutes and not with an item or really an opportunity for questions, just an update and then move into the policy related items.
Great, I understand. Will the assessment you're talking about be presented to this PRC or the whole council?
We can probably do both. It would be nice to present it to this council because it will have a lot of information, so we can go really in depth within this committee, but then the council as a whole will also likely get a work session.
Okay, great. Thank you. So would anybody on the call like to volunteer to go first next month? And then I'm gonna get to that, Mayor Pro Tem, and then I'll come to you and then we'll wrap up. I can voluntold folks as well.
Are you talking about like agencies or sorry?
Yes, yes, an agency spotlight. Just sort of. Yeah. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. At the next meeting or right now?
No, the next month.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, Natalie will connect with you about it.
Thank you, Counselor.
Thank you. Perfect. And then so folks, for next month, think about if you want to go first to volunteer. Mayor,
Madam Chair, I'm sorry to interrupt, but otherwise I'll forget because I have a little note, a little post-it here to remind me. So this was moved, this is normally held on Thursdays, correct? This meeting? Or did
No,
we move it to
we've been
Wednesday?
having it on Wednesdays. Mhm.
So we're going to stay on Wednesday. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem? You might be on mute.
I am. The little button was giving me problems. Yeah, I am. I just want to. I don't mean this in any way disrespectfully. I'm very happy to hear about the agency updates and whatnot, but to Natalie's comment about, staff's requesting to stick to policy stuff, I find that when you hear, like, for example, what Sonia is doing, mortgage finance authorities specific to Doña County, and others, it's important for us to know that and to really be able to have some dialogue. So, because then it helps, in my mind, develop policy. So I find it difficult to have just a few minutes to do some updates when I think each of our organizations that provide, like, for example, Community of Hope, Section 8, are really struggling. And so for me, it's not just about doing an update, it's about really talking to us about the limitations, the gaps, so that we could be thinking about policy. So I really want to use this time to be able to get the updates, but also to understand what the gaps and barriers are, the number of folks that we're just not, addressing appropriately. So then we can develop policy specifically. So these PRCs are for us really to develop policy. Staff is here to help us navigate this and provide the technical assistance part because they are experts in this. So I just want to remind us that I feel like we really need to have that and give, enough time to be able to have those discussions. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I agree with you. I think often those folks who are directly on the ground doing the work can absolutely inform the policy. And so that's helpful. Okay, that's it. Next meeting, October 21st, 2 p.m. Yes. Thank you, Natalie. And that's it. Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining us.